The first snow of November had dusted the streets of downtown Chicago with a layer of gray slush that clung to boots and hopes alike. Inside the Bluebird Coffee House, the scent of espresso beans and burnt caramel did its best to mask the fatigue in Emily Carter's bones. She moved like a machine behind the counter, pour, steam, serve, smile, repeating a rhythm she knew better than her own heartbeat. The cafe, cozy with its vintage booths and mismatched mugs, had become more than a job. It was a shield. A place to pretend that life hadn't become a ticking clock with a $312,480 price tag hanging from it. Her mother's projected medical cost, last estimate. Stage 4 renal failure. The words had cracked something inside her the day the doctor spoke them. Since then, everything else, sleep, joy, even fear, had become white noise. Emily's apron was stained with espresso splashes and hope, barely holding together after weeks of double shifts. Her shoes were soaked from the alley trash run, and her hands ached from holding trays too long. Still, she greeted every customer with the same professional warmth, only breaking when the door chimed and in walked a man who didn't belong in a place like this. Jack Monroe looked like he'd stepped out of a luxury car commercial. Charcoal wool coat draped over his broad shoulders, suit cut with surgical precision, eyes cold enough to chill the steam rising from the machines. He didn't look around. He didn't need to. Men like him expected the world to rearrange itself around their presence. She met him at the register, pen poised above the cardboard cup. "Name?" she asked. He didn't glance up from his phone. "Jack." The name was short, hard, efficient, like him. She scribbled it down and started to turn, but something made him lift his head. Their eyes met for a second too long. Then came the slow, practiced once-over. Not leering. Assessing. As if he were evaluating her like an asset on a spreadsheet. "You're not usually here in the mornings," he said. "I work nights." "Today's a double," she replied flatly. She was already reaching for the espresso lever when his voice followed her. "Must be exhausting." It wasn't sympathy. It was curiosity, maybe even challenge. "$4.75, she said when the drink was done, holding out a paper cup with one hand and her composure with the other. He pulled out a slim black card, the kind that didn't blink at 4-digit wine taps. But instead of tapping it, he hesitated. "What's your name?" She blinked. "Emily." "Emily?" he repeated like it tasted interesting. Then he pulled a business card from his coat pocket and placed it on the counter. "I have a proposition for you." Her stomach tightened. "I don't need another job," she said, voice sharp. "Not offering one." He slid the card closer. $1 million. One night. No strings after. For a second, time froze. The hum of the machines, the clatter of mugs, the conversations, all faded under the roar in her ears. 1 million. Her breath caught. She stared at him, thinking he must be joking. His face said otherwise. There was no smirk. Just the deadly calm of a man who got what he wanted. She didn't touch the card. "Get out," she whispered. Her hands were shaking. He rose without complaint, took his coffee and walked out. No scene. No parting shot. Just the chime of the bell and the cold air rushing in behind him. She stood there long after he left, heart thudding against her ribs like it wanted out. The card sat on the counter as out of place as blood on snow. She should have thrown it away. Burned it. But instead, when no one was looking, she slipped it into her pocket. Not because she'd consider it, God, no, but because something in her needed to hold proof that the world could offer miracles, even the ugly kind. The rest of her shift passed in a daze. She poured drinks, wiped counters, answered questions she didn't hear. When she finally stumbled home to her studio apartment in Lincoln Park, the cold followed her up the stairs and settled in her chest. The peeling walls, the flickering kitchen light, the folded hospital invoices on the table, it all pressed down on her like a weight that wouldn't lift. Her mother's most recent lab work was worse. The dialysis wasn't working anymore. The experimental treatment, $312,480, was the last chance. She sat on the edge of her bed, coat still on, staring at the business card. Jack Monroe. Monroe Holdings. The paper was thick, the lettering embossed, one corner smudged with a faint ring of coffee from where her trembling hand had rested. Her fingers hovered over her phone, the screen lighting up her pale face in the dark. She told herself she was just curious. Just checking if the number worked. But it rang once. Then twice. Then a third time. "Monroe," his voice said, smooth and composed. She closed her eyes, gripped the phone tighter. "This is Emily," she whispered. "From the cafe." Pause. She could hear the shift in his breath. "I remember." Her voice cracked. "I'll do it." The Wexford Hotel loomed over the Chicago skyline like a monument to excess, its polished glass facade mirroring the city's ambitions. Emily stood in the lobby, out of place in a simple black coat that had seen too many winters. Everything around her gleamed: crystal chandeliers, marble floors, concierge desks staffed with smiles too white to be real. She clutched her purse like a lifeline, her fingers numb from something colder than the wind outside. The doorman greeted her by name before she could speak, escorting her to a private elevator that rose without a sound. Each passing floor felt like a departure from her reality, the numbers on the panel ticking her closer to something irreversible. When the doors opened, she stepped into a suite larger than her entire apartment. The windows stretched from floor to ceiling, displaying Chicago's lights like scattered diamonds across a velvet sky. Soft music played from hidden speakers, some instrumental piece that felt too intimate. Jack Monroe stood near a sideboard, pouring 2 drinks with practiced ease. He looked relaxed, tie loosened, shirt sleeves rolled, the image of a man who controlled every room he entered. Yet something in his posture was guarded, as if he too were bracing for impact. "You're early," he said without turning, his voice measured. Emily ignored the comment. She walked to the dining table where a folder waited, its leather cover embossed with Monroe Holdings. Her name was typed on the first page of the contract. The ink looked fresh, accusing. She sat, heart hammering, hands trembling slightly as she opened it. The language was precise, clinical. 1 night. No future claims. $1 million. Wire transfer initiated upon signing. The conditions weren't hidden. They were almost proud in their clarity. Jack moved closer, placing a glass beside her without comment. She didn't touch it. Her pen felt heavy as she uncapped it. For a moment, she just stared at the line that waited for her signature. It felt like a canyon. Then she signed, each letter deliberate. The name she wrote belonged to someone else, a version of herself she didn't yet understand. He watched her without comment, his expression unreadable. "You'll get confirmation of the transfer within minutes," he said finally. She nodded, standing slowly. Her phone buzzed almost immediately. She pulled it out and saw it, the deposit. 7 figures. Just like that, the weight of years shifted. She opened her banking app and, without hesitation, initiated the payment to Mercy General. Her mother's account. Paid in full. The confirmation pinged seconds later, a sterile screen holding more hope than anything she'd felt in months. For a moment she allowed herself to exhale. But relief was short-lived. Jack moved closer, not touching her, but close enough that she could feel the warmth of his presence. The tension between them thickened, charged with something that wasn't quite desire, not yet, but something heavier. He was watching her, not with hunger, but with scrutiny, as though trying to solve a riddle he hadn't expected to encounter. She turned toward the windows, needing space. The city below moved on without them, unaware that something had been traded in this glass tower, something no wire transfer could measure. "You didn't ask for details," he said quietly. She kept her back to him. "I didn't want them. Most people would. I'm not most people." She felt him behind her, a shadow she could sense even with her eyes closed. When she opened them, her reflection stared back from the darkened glass, tired, thin, unfamiliar. Jack's was beside it, sharper, more defined. Together they looked like opposites in some forgotten painting. He reached for her then, not forcefully, but with a carefulness that unsettled her more than aggression would have. His fingers brushed her wrist, then hesitated, as if waiting for permission he wasn't sure he deserved. She didn't move. But her breath hitched, just enough to make her step back. "I need a minute," she murmured and moved toward the bathroom. Inside, marble and chrome reflected every angle of herself she didn't want to see. She turned on the cold water, splashing her face carefully to preserve the makeup she'd spent half her last paycheck on. Her phone buzzed again, a message from the hospital confirming the cleared balance. No more collection calls. No more threats of discharge. Her mother would stay, would be treated. That should have felt like triumph. Instead, she gripped the sink, steadying herself against a wave of something that felt dangerously close to shame. When she emerged, Jack was standing near the bedroom, drink untouched, jacket discarded. His eyes met hers, and for the first time, he looked almost uncertain. She crossed the room slowly, reclaiming her purse from the table. "You have what you paid for," she said, her voice steady but soft. "The hours are yours." He didn't answer. She stepped toward the door, her heels muffled by the thick carpet. He watched her go, expression still unreadable, as if unsure what had just happened or what it meant. The door clicked behind her like the end of a chapter she hadn't yet decided to regret. Down the elevator, through the lobby, into the bitter wind of the street, Emily walked into the night with $1 million in her account and something unnamed left behind in the suite above. Jack stood in silence, still watching the door, wondering why the moment she left felt like something had just come undone inside him. The Bluebird Coffee House returned to its usual rhythm, but Emily moved through it like a ghost trying to remember how to be flesh. She poured lattes, restocked pastry trays, scribbled names on cups, but none of it felt solid anymore. Every motion was too practiced, too distant. The money had been real. The night had been real. And yet everything about her life now felt false. Her mother was stable, recovering, already talking about rehab and a possible kidney donor. Emily should have been happy. Instead, the memory of the penthouse suite, the silence that followed, and Jack's unreadable face haunted her more than any debt collector ever had. She hadn't heard from him since that night, nor had she reached out. She told herself it was for the best. Clean cuts healed faster. Lisa Morales, her co-worker and closest confidant, had picked up on the change immediately. She asked once, then let it go, watching Emily more closely than usual. On a Tuesday morning thick with sleet and lukewarm coffee orders, Lisa cornered her behind the counter. "You've been somewhere else for days, Em. You look like someone rewound you and forgot to hit play again." Emily offered a tired smile, brushing it off. "Just tired. Mom's starting treatment next week. Lots on my mind." It was technically true, and Lisa, sensing the wall, didn't push. The bell above the cafe door rang at noon, and in stepped a man who didn't belong among the regulars in damp hoodies and construction boots. Dean Travers. His reputation in the business world preceded him, but Emily recognized him for a different reason. She'd seen his face before, on the Sterling Trust website and company newsletters, always beside Jack Monroe. He wore tailored arrogance like a second skin and carried himself with the effortless authority of someone who expected the world to move aside. His eyes scanned the cafe until they landed on Emily, and then he smiled. She stiffened. Lisa caught the shift in her posture immediately, raising an eyebrow. "Friend of yours?" Emily shook her head. "I'll handle it." She stepped out from behind the counter as Dean approached, a snake in expensive wool. "Miss Carter," he said, with the practiced charm of a man who negotiated hedge fund takeovers between sips of scotch. "Do you have a moment?" "I'm working," she replied, jaw tight. "It won't take long. It's about Jack. And your arrangement." The last word dropped like a stone in a quiet room. Lisa's eyes narrowed from across the counter, but she said nothing. Emily walked to the corner table where Dean was already sitting, legs crossed, fingers toying with a silver pen. He didn't wait for her to speak. "Jack's been unpredictable since your night together. It's starting to concern people. You've created quite a stir." Emily stared at him, refusing to speak. "So, I came to clarify some things. See, your time with Jack wasn't spontaneous. It was inspired by a wager." The floor seemed to shift under her feet. Dean continued, undeterred. "A bet, to be precise. Jack and I were drinking after a board meeting. We argued about whether people like you, people with principles, could ever be swayed by money." He pulled out his phone and tapped until he found what he wanted. Then, without a trace of hesitation, he turned it toward her. Messages. Conversations. Jack's name. Her name. The number. The challenge. Her hand reached out, but she didn't touch the screen. She didn't need to. The words burned through her without sound. "He made the offer because of the bet," Dean said smoothly. "And he won. Congratulations. You were worth the full $1 million. He pulled out a business card, sliding it across the table. "But I'm willing to go higher. If one night with you can fracture Jack's focus, I can only imagine what a week might do." His smile widened. Emily's hand didn't shake. It moved with brutal clarity as she slapped him across the face. The crack turned heads. Dean recoiled, stunned more by the contact than the force. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. She turned on her heel and walked straight to the employee restroom, locking the door behind her before the sob tore loose from her throat. Her knees buckled. She sank to the floor, her breath coming in ragged gasps. The stall walls blurred through tears she couldn't stop. It hadn't just been a transaction. She'd let herself believe, if only for a moment, that there had been something real. And it had all been a game. When she finally emerged, face washed, apron straightened, Jack was there. He stood near the door, eyes wild as if he'd run to get there. "Emily," he started, but she held up a hand. "Don't." Her voice was cold, fragile only in the way shattered glass is fragile. "You knew." His expression crumbled, but she didn't wait to hear his defense. She walked past him, out the side exit into the freezing wind. Later that night, in his office high above the city, Jack fed the contract, the one she had signed, the one he'd kept hidden in a drawer, to the shredder. The paper curled and disappeared into ribbons, but the damage it had done remained. He stared at the empty tray, wondering when he'd started mistaking people for risks to be managed, wondering if what he'd destroyed could ever be rebuilt. The corridors of Mercy General smelled of antiseptic and uncertainty, but that morning they held something else, an edge of quiet optimism. Emily stood beside her mother's bed, helping her sit up as the nurse adjusted the foredrip. The color had returned to her mother's cheeks, faint but unmistakable, and her voice no longer cracked from weakness when she spoke. Emily had come to the hospital every day since that night, sometimes just to sit in the waiting room with a book she never read, sometimes to accompany her mother to appointments she couldn't afford 3 weeks ago. The money from that one night, one soul-rattling choice, had opened the door to possibility. But the price still echoed through every sleepless hour. She hadn't spoken to Jack since she'd walked past him at the cafe, didn't even know what she would say if given the chance. Whatever lived between them now was a wreckage of assumptions and betrayal, the kind that even silence couldn't smooth over. She had buried herself in work, helped her mother, pretended not to see her name circling the edge of gossip in people's eyes. But pretending hadn't made her feel clean. That morning, as Emily stepped into the nurse's station to ask about rescheduling her mother's next round of treatment, she overheard 2 nurses chatting beside the medication cart. One of them held a clipboard, frowning. "I thought this was still in processing," she said. "Nope," the other replied. "Anonymous donor. Cleared everything. Even pre-authorized the next phase. Full coverage." Emily paused, ice blooming in her chest. "Sorry," she said slowly, stepping closer. "Who did you say made the payment?" The nurse smiled. "No name. Just a wire confirmation through the foundation account. Someone's guardian angel, I guess." Emily left the station without responding. Her hands trembled as she walked down the hallway, her boots suddenly too loud on the tile floor. She knew. There was only one person in the world with the means and motive. Jack. And he hadn't told her. Not with a message, not with a card, not even through Lisa. It should have infuriated her. Instead, it disarmed her in a way nothing else could. That night, back at the apartment, she sat on the floor surrounded by laundry she couldn't finish folding, the television buzzing in the background with muted news coverage. Lisa burst through the door, holding her phone like it was on fire. "You are not going to believe this," she said, tossing the device into Emily's lap. "Read." It was an article from the Chicago Tribune. The headline, "Monroe Holdings Restructures After Board Dissolution. CEO Speaks on Redemption and Reform." Beneath it, a photo of Jack at a podium, the city's skyline behind him. He looked different, tired, raw, stripped of the polish that usually surrounded him like a protective shell. Emily's eyes scanned the text. He had dismantled the board of directors. Dean Travers had been removed. Several toxic corporate holdings were being sold off. But it was the transcript of his public statement that made her throat tighten. "I built my empire on the belief that everything had a price. I was wrong. Some things, love, trust, dignity, exist outside the realm of transaction. I hurt someone I never should have, and though I won't name her, I owe her the truth. She changed the way I see the world. If this costs me everything I built, so be it. At least I'll know I finally built something real." Lisa sat beside her, quiet now. "He didn't name you," she said. "But he didn't have to." Emily swallowed. The words weren't enough to erase what had been done, but they weren't empty either. They held weight. They had risk. They were offered without the expectation of return. It wasn't a buyout. It was something closer to confession. She stared at the screen long after Lisa had gone to bed. Her mother's life was no longer hanging in financial limbo. The company that had once profited from moral erosion was being taken apart, piece by piece, in front of the entire city. And the man who had shattered her heart had finally stood still long enough to name what he'd done, without a shadow to hide behind. The decision came quietly, without fanfare or revelation. Emily reached for her phone, thumb hovering over the name she hadn't touched in weeks. The screen glowed in the darkness as she typed the message. Simple. Direct. Measured. Tuesday. Bluebird. 7 p.m. No punctuation. No pleasantries. Just the time and the place. Let him decide the rest. The phone dimmed in her hand, and for the first time in days, she breathed without flinching. The Bluebird Cafe was nearly silent by 7 o'clock, its usual clatter replaced by the hum of the fridge and the occasional groan of the heating pipes behind the walls. Emily had closed early, stacking chairs on tables and dimming the lights so only the glow above the counter remained. She left one table set near the window, just 2 mugs, 2 spoons, and a fresh pot of French press coffee resting in the center like a peace offering. The smell of roasted beans filled the air, warm and grounding, but her hands wouldn't stop shaking. She didn't know what she expected. Closure maybe. Or clarity. Or just enough strength to face whatever truth he finally chose to bring with him. The bell over the door chimed at exactly 7 p.m. Jack stepped inside wearing no armor, no suit, no tie, just a dark sweater and jeans, his expression unguarded. He paused, taking in the quiet cafe before meeting her eyes with something close to apology. Emily gestured toward the table without speaking. He crossed the room and sat slowly as if wary of breaking something fragile. She poured them both coffee, the quiet splash of liquid sounding too loud in the stillness between them. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Emily broke the silence. She asked him why. Not why he came tonight, not why he'd stayed away, but why he made the offer in the first place. Why her? Jack's fingers curled around the warm mug, his gaze fixed on it. He said it started as a bet, a cruel one, made in arrogance and boredom over drinks with Dean. He told her how he'd argued that people like her, principled, self-contained, could be bought like everyone else, and how Dean had laughed at the idea. So Jack set out to prove it, thinking it was harmless, thinking it would confirm what he already believed about the world. That everything had a price if you just named the right number. But then he met her. And something shifted. She didn't flirt. She didn't pretend. She challenged him, looked at him like he was the one on trial. Even as she said no, even as she handed him his coffee with ice in her voice, something about her refusal rang louder than any yes he'd ever bought. He didn't expect her to call. And when she did, he told himself it was a win. But when she left that hotel room before dawn, it didn't feel like victory. It felt like loss. Emily listened in silence, the storm behind her eyes held carefully in check. Then she spoke, not about the money or the contract but about control. How she'd grown up watching her mother stretch every dollar, watching her father walk out when things got tight. How she'd sworn never to be in anyone's debt. That was what scared her most. Not the night. Not even the betrayal. But the idea that someone could write a check and claim a piece of her life. They sat in that truth for a while, neither defending nor apologizing. Just laying it out, thread by thread, until the knots started to loosen. Jack reached into his coat and pulled out something small and worn. The business card he'd given her that first day at the cafe. It was still stained with coffee, the edges soft from handling. He placed it on the table between them. Said he'd kept it as a reminder of the moment he stopped seeing people as deals. Told her he thought maybe it was time they tore it up. She stared at the card. So much had begun with that rectangle of expensive paper. The offer. The night. The fracture. And now maybe the healing. She picked up one edge while he held the other. Together they pulled. The card ripped down the center with a sound that echoed louder than it should have in the quiet room. They didn't speak for a moment afterward. There was nothing left to say about that chapter. Eventually, Emily stood and grabbed their coats from the hook by the door. Jack followed her outside without question. They walked in silence through the streets toward Millennium Park. The air was sharp, the trees lit with winter lights, the world soft around the edges. They passed the bean, its mirrored surface reflecting a distorted version of themselves that felt oddly honest, flawed, unfinished but side by side. Jack said nothing until they reached the bridge. He stopped, turned to face her, and asked, not with pressure or expectation, but quietly, if she might consider dinner. A real one. No contracts, no stakes. Just conversation. Emily looked at him, really looked at him, not the man in the penthouse or the one behind the offer, but the man who'd stood in front of microphones and stripped his reputation bare without asking for anything back. She didn't smile. Not exactly. But her voice was steady when she said yes. Not to promises. Not to forgetting. But to the chance that maybe, just maybe, truth was worth more than any price either of them had paid. As they walked back toward the cafe, the lights of the city blinking around them like stars straining to be seen, Emily felt the weight of what had been begin to lift, leaving space for something else. Something still unnamed but entirely real.